Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? It is July 1st. This shirt right here, you know, it's wrinkly. It hasn't seen the light of day in a long time. I just got it out of the drawer, saw that, said I haven't worn this in a long time. So the humidity, it's very, very humid here. So humidity should iron this thing right out, so it won't be so wrinkly in about an hour. I did not. I got the shirt as a gift from somebody. They had a bunch of old shirts. Say, you want this one? Sure, that looks kind of cool. A friend of mine, another friend of mine, saw me right afterwards. Say, hey, I didn't know you worked for Apple. I had no idea this was like one of their shirts. I'm like, no, it just clearly it says what I am right on the shirt. I mean, if the shoe fits, wear it, right? This video has nothing to do with that, but I just thought that was kind of funny. You know, shoe fits. Yeah, I'm a genius, kids. And that was really pretentious, wasn't it? A while ago, I made a video about player behaviors that drive me nuts, kind of like pet peeves. I think I even had a angry little kid as the icon or thumbnail for the video. And, you know, DBJ, Dave Breon Jackson, you know, made a couple comments and said, hey, you should do a series of videos about each one of these, because I kind of lumped a whole bunch together. I said, sure, why not? I'll do that. And I kind of put it on the back burner of things to talk about. And, you know, I was thinking about it more and more. I didn't want to make it really... I didn't want to really make it negative when it came right down to it. I try not to do that as much anymore. And I wanted to kind of put a positive spin on it. And I was talking to a friend today a little bit about that. And I finally figured, well, why don't I kind of talk about my own journey with these particular things? Because I've certainly been guilty of every single one of those pet peeves. Every single one of those player behaviors, I've done them. I try not to do them as much. So today I want to talk about indecision, and generally like player indecision, and then lack of party cohesion, which really I think is part of... You know, another part of indecision is it's indecision as a party, inability to come to some kind of consensus. So anyhow, talk about player indecision first. This is not something I've had as much experience with as a player. I'm usually pretty involved and gung ho. If anything, you know, if I'm not careful, I will run roughshod over other people because I really know what I want to do, and that sometimes can lead to me looking indecisive. But I'll get to that. Maybe in the beginning, sometimes I was more indecisive, but over time, that evaporated pretty darn quick. I knew what I wanted to do. What I've generally seen in other players is, you know, oftentimes if you talk to them, if you kind of try to have this dialogue while they're sitting there kind of frozen, you know, because it's classic. You're in a combat or something, and you get to the player, and they're just like, they know what to do, and they kind of hem and haw or whatever. You know, sometimes it's just that they don't understand the game as well, or maybe a lot of times they're looking at their character sheet and they say, well, I really don't have any options here. And oftentimes you talk to them, and what they mean is, I don't have any options on this character sheet. Like, my character can't do anything here. And so sometimes you have to kind of goad people into thinking outside the box. And I don't care whether we're talking about OSR, D&D, or whether we're talking about Ubiquity games, or you know, Fate, or Fudge, or you know, whatever. Doesn't really matter. You know, thinking outside the box is critical to role playing. It takes a while. You know, other people seem to get it right away. I've also noticed that, you know, oftentimes when they say I don't have any options here, what they mean is I don't have any options that are going to be successful. You know, and you know, sometimes, you know, it took me a while to become okay with the fact that maybe, you know, all my actions kind of led me here. You know, I get together with some people, and one of the sayings they tend to have is, you're right where you're supposed to be. And it took me a while to figure out what that meant was, you know, based on the choices I've made and the places I've gone and everything, where else would I possibly be? So sometimes my choices have just led me there. Sometimes there were choices I could have avoided. Sometimes there were just, you know, parts of the environment I was unaware of. So sometimes you find yourself in some kind of dicey situation. It doesn't necessarily have to be combat where you might die, or your character might die, anyhow. It could be something where you just, whatever kind of outcome looks like is going to happen for you is not going to be wonderful, or not what you wanted. So sometimes, you know, it took me a while. Like, you know, in the beginning, I always wanted to win, you know, or for good things to happen to my character. You know, over time, I became more okay with, okay, well, things may not go exactly as I wanted here, but you know, what would my character do in this particular situation? I had an example, or something like that happened very recently in Francois' when it was his turn to run All for One in Lights and Darkness, and the Crows of the Wendigo, I think was what we finally ended up calling that session. There was a particular moment where my character was injured to the point where he could only take one action around. And in Ubiquity, you can take an attack action, a move action, and as many defense actions as you need during a combat. Once you're wounded to a certain point, you can only take one. You have to choose. And the most intelligent thing for me to do at that point was to take defense actions, because this creature that we were fighting could kill me with one blow when it came right down to it. However, I can say when it comes right down to it too much lately. I'm not sure. I think I seem to have replaced with that. Anyhow, but I realized, I sat there and kind of swallowed hard for a second and realized my character was, you know, all for one. And he was going to fight to the death with his fellow musketeers, so I took an attack. So it was was a moment of hesitation, and then I knew what I was going to do, what Philippe would do. So, for me, what I had to do a lot of times was put myself into the shoes of the character. What would they do? Speaking of, like when it's really fast, like I remember, like we were sitting in a game with James Carpio, as a matter of fact, and he finally said to one indecisive player, or a couple indecisive players, well, these are 6-second rounds. And so sometimes, it helps kind of putting yourself in that mindset. Things are going by really fast. Your character doesn't have an awful lot of time to think of some grand plan or scheme. So, what would they do in this situation? Even if it's something really inappropriate, like scream or, run away or, whatever, throw something, rather ineffective at whatever is attacking them. Or, it doesn't have to be combat. That's just kind of an easy thing to talk about when it comes right down to it. See, there I go again. Anyhow. As far as I want to talk about this though. Sometimes, because I am so proactive and I know what I want to do, I know that sometimes I can be a little bit overbearing, and I don't mean to, but I kind of run roughshod over players that are more passive. And so sometimes I end up appearing indecisive because I'm holding back, because I don't want to kind of strong arm the party into going the way that I want to, which kind of dovetails really well into this party indecision or lack of cohesion. This can happen, at least in my experience, in a variety of ways. A lot of times it's just plain old inability to come to a consensus. And, I noticed in a couple of games I was involved in recently. Sometimes, I think for me, I had to make some adjustments as a player. Once again, not as many. I don't want to say I'm all that in a bag of chips. I'm really not. But I started to wrap my head around. I remember when I was younger, newer to role-playing games, I started to always try to do the thing that was going to be optimal for my character. And then after a while, what happened was I started to realize, well, what is my role in this group of people? And sometimes there's a lack of party cohesion, but really when you think about it, there might be a leader of that party. And I'm not talking about the standard D&D party caller, maybe that's what it is, but maybe there's somebody sitting in charge. I played in that game, that Lamentations of the Flame Princess, one shot that James Carpio ran, and I ended up being the lieutenant. Now, if I ended up being the corporal or the private and somebody else was barking orders, I would have gone along with those because they were in a position of being in charge. And so, for me, I had to figure out what exactly, what place does my character have in this group of people? Other times, it's just a matter of saying, okay, well, we need to, take some kind of vote here and move on. Because otherwise, if you're stuck, if you're just unable to come to some kind of consensus, that can be really annoying for everybody. So that's another way to kind of, get over that, or at least in my experience. I hate to say it, but sometimes the best way to have really good party cohesion is to, choose really good players and, not play with people that tend to be really argumentative or just, adversarial just for the sake of being adversarial. You can kind of suss those people out pretty fast. Sometimes you have to be unafraid to split the party. And, even if you stay in the same place, maybe various people decide they're going to do something else, which is one of those things. Sometimes you don't need to come to consensus as a party. Sometimes people think you do, and they have this big kind of argument at the table, and you realize, well, wait a minute, my character can just go do this, and maybe it's not cohesive with what everybody else is doing, but at that point, maybe that's what those characters would do in that particular situation. We don't all have to move here, join at the hip as a group, and go over here, then go over there. We can all interact with the environment in different ways. Sometimes that does mean splitting the party. We all have our own ideas of what we want to do in this particular situation. Go ahead, go do it. Might work well, might not work well. Might be a little bit more work for the game master or for the players. But if that's what you really want to do, go ahead. And sometimes it's just not really having all the information. And so you need to talk amongst yourself or pretty much get a better idea of what's really going on here. Think out what's your real plan. You know what it is, too? Sometimes we're not telling each other our intentions. We're saying, I want to do this, or I want to do that, or whatever, but we're not saying, well, because I think this is what's going to happen. Sometimes we do it too much, and it turns into an argument. But sometimes I found that, really what's going on is we're not really communicating enough with one another. But, probably at the end of the day, lack of party cohesion. Sometimes you need to grind gears against each other a little bit and kind of figure each other out. Sometimes you have to be willing to disagree and move on in different directions. And sometimes, you need to figure out, well, okay, maybe these aren't the right people to play with because they're always going to be arguing. Or maybe we need to pare down the group a little bit and figure out who's really good for it. That sounds terrible, but sometimes that's what needs to happen. And sometimes it's, some of those really indecisive players. They may not be getting better at becoming decisive. So you need to kind of ask, say, hey, maybe this isn't the right game for you. So that's kind of my take on indecisiveness and party cohesion. I find it's easier to tackle indecisiveness as a player. It's easier to change yourself and kind of see things through from a different perspective. It's a little bit harder to gain that kind of party cohesion. You can kind of talk with each other as adults, and hopefully maybe you're just not communicating. Sometimes you realize that you can go in different directions. That's okay, and sometimes you decide you might need to really go in different directions. So a little rambly, but that's kind of my take on that particular subject.